Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Let us have the sincere intentions, lillahi ta'ala. Today we're going to finish the chapter on the sins of the body, inshallah. And we're going to start off with the author saying, to waylay, depending on the committed crime. The waylayer's punishment is either disciplinary action or cutting off both the right hand and the left foot, or executing one and hanging one's body on a pole. Okay, so the explanation is, so to waylay means to lie in wait for and attack someone by surprise, or to unexpectedly intercept and stop a person while they're on their way somewhere. And this is an enormous sin. Even if the waylayer does not take money or kill, but if those actions take place, like the money, taking money or killing, then it's even more of an enormous sin. Allah dispraised severely in the Quran the one who commits the sin and told us that the waylayers deserve in the hereafter a severe punishment, as is mentioned in Surah Ma'idah. So the waylayer's punishment is punished according to the degree of his crime. If the waylayer terrorizes the passengers and takes their money without killing or injuring them, then he deserves both his right hand and his left foot to be cut off. And again, if we said previously in other classes, that in the rules of the religion, the Sharia, as a punishment, it does not mean that the rulers nowadays apply this punishment. And another thing that we mentioned is that for a rule to apply such punishments, it's for the ruler to apply such punishment, the Khalifa specifically, and it's not that anyone can apply these punishments. So there is a condition for his right hand and his left foot to be cut off, and this condition is for the money that he took from the passengers, to be worth 1/4 of a golden dinar or more. So as we mentioned in the issue of stealing, if the waylayer takes the money and kills, then his punishment is to be killed and then hanged on a pole. First he would be executed, then washed, then shrouded, prayed for, and then he would be hanged on a pole. Then he would be hanged for 3 days, and that is if his body does not decay before that. Then he would be buried. If his crime was to kill passengers, then he would be killed without being hanged. If he terrorizes the people without taking money or killing them, then the ruler punishes him with a suitable punishment. And of course, there are rules that direct the ruler of how to punish. Those who help the waylayers, so they don't waylay themselves, they don't terrorize people, take the money or kill, but they help the waylayers, the ruler punishes them with a suitable punishment, either to put them in jail or hit them, and it just depends also on the ijtihad of the ruler. The author said, to neglect fulfilling a vow. So among the sins of the body is to leave out fulfilling a vow because it's an obligation to fulfill it. For it to be an obligation to fulfill a vow, this vow has to fulfill certain conditions. Among these conditions is for the vow to be done in what pertains to an act of worship, to a good act, a rewardable act without being an obligation. For example, if someone makes a vow to do a rewardable act without this act being an obligation, then one is obligated to fulfill this vow. For example, if someone makes a vow, it's like a nadr, to read Quran every day. On the other hand, if one makes the vow to commit a sin, in this case, this is not a valid vow. He does not have to fulfill it, rather it is prohibited for him to fulfill it. If someone makes a vow to do an obligatory act, this vow is not valid, but still one has to do this act because it's an obligation. So if someone makes the vow to pray the obligatory prayers 5 times a day, every day and night, this vow is not valid. But he has to do it because that in itself is an obligation. To pray 5 times a day is an obligation. So also, if one makes a vow to do a permissible thing, which is neither rewardable or blameworthy. So he does not get reward for doing it. He is not sinful for doing it. He does not get reward for living it out, and he is not sinful for living it out. For example, to eat bread. If someone eats bread and he does not get a reward, and he is not sinful. If someone does not eat bread, he does not get a reward, and he is not sinful. So if someone makes a vow to do a similar act like that, in this case, the vow is not valid, and he does not have to fill it because there's no reward in eating bread. So it's narrated by Al-Bukhari from the Prophet ﷺ that said, um, which means the one who makes a vow to obey Allah, let him do that. The one who makes a vow to commit a sin, let him not commit that sin. So it's also known from what we said, if someone makes a vow to leave out a sin, then this vow is not valid because it's already an obligation to leave it out. The author said, okay, so the next sin of the body is to continue fasting for 2 days or more without eating or drinking anything in between. So it's permissible for somebody to fast 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or even 10 days consecutively. If he does that, he cannot continue his fast the next day without breaking it. So he has to break his fast, even if it's a sip of water. If one intentionally fasts 2 consecutive days without eating or drinking anything at night, then one commits a sin. By that, because the Prophet ﷺ prohibited us from doing that. One time, when the Prophet ﷺ was mentioning the rule, a man told him, like, yeah, you do it, you do that. That is, the Prophet ﷺ, who used to fast 2 consecutive days without breaking his fast. The Prophet ﷺ said, which means that my situation is not like yours. So Allah strengthens me during the night as if I eat and drink. And sometimes in certain situations, this is what happens with the Prophet ﷺ. It does not mean that he never goes hungry. It means that Allah, in certain cases, gives him special strength. And in those cases, he fasts 2 consecutive days without eating or drinking. Sometimes the Prophet ﷺ was hungry, and we know that because he used to tie a stone to his stomach out of hunger. So let it be known when he used to face hunger, this was not because of poverty, because Allah gave the Prophet what was enough for his needs, as mentioned in the Quran, which means Allah satisfies your needs. The author said to occupy someone's place in a street or the like, to to harmfully crowd one or to take one's turn. So if someone sits somewhere in the masjid, for example, before others, it is not permissible for other people or anyone else to take his place, to drive him away, or to tell him to move. I want to sit here. This applies to the mosque and similar places that are not owned by a specific person or people. And that is like the mosque, the streets, and the like. For example, if someone sits in the street to do something, it's not permissible for someone else to tell him, move, I want to take this place. I want to sit there. Of course, that is if he sits in a way that does not bother the people who are passing by in the street, so he does not cause them any problems, any harm. So whether this permission is because of the ruler or not. So this means that I don't need the permission of a ruler to sit in the masjid or the street, for example. It's like the beach also is another place because it's a public place. Now, if harm is caused by him remaining standing somewhere in the street or sitting, then he would be told, finish what you're doing and like go on, move. Like don't stand there and don't harm other people. So you're not harming other people. Likewise, two people, they want to take water from a source, and there is enough for both of them to do that together. So it's not permissible for one of them to crowd the other person in a harmful way. Another example, if there is like a public source of water and it's not owned by a specific person or people, then one is not entitled to take the turn of other people. Also, if there's like a piece of land that um, are irrigated in a certain order imposed by the religious rules, in this case, it's not permissible for someone to take turn of another person. But let us say that there were like we're in a store and there's two of us. And the owner of the store, he wanted to check out the other person. He did not want to start with me, although I came first. He's entitled to do that because it's his store and he can actually abstain from selling items to me. And I cannot force him at the same time to sell an item to me. So when we are talking about taking places of someone or observing an order, we are not talking about the place owned by a specific person. We're talking about a public place, such as the masjid, the street, the beach, and the like. Another example is if there is a public place that contains salt, for example, and it's not owned by a specific person, and there is a certain order observed to take the salt from there, according to the rules. There are basically some rules that to take a salt. It's not permissible for one to take the turn of another person. Okay, by that we finished the chapter on the sense of the body. But before we moving on, there's one more chapter. It's the chapter of repentance. And this is the last chapter of the whole text. Um, let us talk a little bit about how to differentiate between an enormous sin and a sin that's not enormous. Because we mentioned about several sins that are among the enormous sins. So, what is the definition of an enormous sin? The scholars mentioned several definitions. One of the best definitions is to say every sin in the Quran, the Sunnah of the Prophet, or all the consensus of the nation that explicitly mentions that it's an enormous sin, or a great sin, or there is a great punishment for doing it, or one deserves to be punished by specific punishment in this life for doing it, then it would be considered an enormous sin. Or the one who does it is very blameworthy, then it's also an enormous sin. So if one commits an enormous sin, one deserves to be punishment in the hereafter by hellfire, even if one does not do any other sin. So that is without repenting, without stopping the sin, or without regret. And it's not wiped out. So these enormous sins are not wiped out if someone does a good sin after them, except if Allah willed for that to happen. As for the small sins, if a person does it and after doing it, he does a good deed, a rewardable deed, it would be erased. And if the small sins do not exceed his rewards, he would not be tortured in hellfire for them if he does not commit an enormous sin. So if someone prays and then he makes a certain small sin, and then after that he makes wudu, he prays, then those sins committed in between those two acts, between those two prayers, are erased. But this is not the case of the enormous sin. It's not mentioned in the religious texts the exact number of enormous sins. Ibn Abbas was once asked, are the enormous sins 7? And he said the number is closer to 70 than 7. If some hadith, 9 among them are mentioned, like in another 7 and another 3 of them, and so on. Tajuddin, he mentioned 35 among the enormous sins, and Suyuti made verses of poetry about this issue, so one would memorize these 35 sins easily. So As-Suyuti, he authored 35 enormous sins in Arabic, this poetry, but he did not mention, although it is proper and it is true to say that Having sexual intercourse with one's wife while she is in her menses is an enormous sin. Um, for a woman to imitate men and a man to imitate a woman. And among the sins is to leave out learning the obligatory knowledge of the religion. So among what Suyuti mentioned include killing unjustly, zina, to drink alcohol, to drink any intoxicating sources, sorcery, to accuse falsely someone with zina, to commit sodomy, to leave out fasting in Ramadan without an excuse, to believe in one's heart that Allah is not going to forgive him for sure, to keep doing sins while believing in one's heart that Allah is going to forgive one, to take advantage of others by force, to steal, to give a false testimony, to bribe, to bring customers to prostitutes, not to pay zakat, to encourage his own wife to commit a zina, or to see her commit zina while he's able to prevent her from doing that, he does not do it. To run away from the battlefield, according to the details that we gave, to cheat in measuring by volume or by weight, to tell one's wife, you are for me like my mother. That is, I do not have sexual intercourse like my mother. To talebear, not to testify. One is an obligation upon one to testify, to swear by Allah, and one of the attributes of Allah while lying, to lie about the Prophet ﷺ, to curse the companions, to hate a Muslim unrightfully, to incite the ruler to harm a Muslim, to severely harm a or the both parents, and this, again, we mentioned that a parent is like a parent figure like a grandpa, grandma, and so on. To sever the ties of kinship, to waylay, to pray the prayer before its due time, delay the prayer until its time is out, to consume the money of the orphans, to eat pig, to eat the meat which is not slaughtered properly, the usurious gains, to take spoils, to take from the spoils of battle before they are distributed properly, to keep doing small sins until they exceeded the good deeds. So again, the enormous sin are closer to 70, and what we have mentioned in this text includes the majority, if not all that's known. Allah knows best. But yeah, the poetry only included 35. So this is not everything. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد. Let us say the tahleel and الصلاة على النبي. لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. بارك الله فيكم. السلام عليكم.